Hi, I'm Mark Madison, and I'm the historian at the National Conservation Training Center, and I'd like to welcome you to a broadcast of Alaskan wildlife. We're going to have a brief photo exhibit and a candid and exciting discussion with a wildlife photographer who's been good enough to come here all the way from Seattle initially, Subhankar Banerjee.
Thank you, Mark.
Welcome here, Subhankar. It's so nice to have you.
I'm very honored to be here, and I'd like to thank my friend Steve Chase and you for bringing me here. It's truly a wonderful place that you have here.
Well, it's just great to have you
up really here. Renewed my soul. I looked at the trees and the rain, and it's just green everywhere. It's just really beautiful.
Spring is a good time in West Virginia. And before we start the back and forth discussion, I would like just to remind our viewers that this is an interactive distance learning broadcast, and we'll periodically run the phone number. And we'd love to have some questions from all of you as Subhankar starts running through his photos and talking about his experiences at Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Please feel free to call in and ask a question. But I'm going to start off with the first question and ask, how did you come to be a wildlife photographer? Your life's journey was pretty far and intellectually challenging.
It is truly a story of a dream that when I was a child in India growing up as a painter, but I went into science. Came to the United States to do my graduate studies. I finished a master's program in physics and another one in computer science, but I landed up in New Mexico and instantly fell in love with the wide open spaces, having come from Calcutta.
Sure.
And this was kind of a 10-year journey where I was trying to combine my love for the outdoor and my passion for painting into a sustainable career, combining art and outdoors. And I had read a lot about the Arctic, including Barry Lopez.
Sure.
And having come from the tropic, Arctic always intrigued me. So I was trying to figure out a career where I could create a project where I could document these pristine lands, and I landed up in the Arctic Refuge.
It's a great story, and actually you've captured this story in a recent book that's come out. A really beautiful photographic and essay book called Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, Seasons of Life and Land. And you've got quite a star lineup of contributors here. Peter Matheson, George Schaller, David Sibley, all really brilliant biologists.
Peter and David Sibley was with me on the field at the refuge last year, so it was a real honor.
Well, it's a lovely book, and a lot of the photos in there are some that you're going to share with us now.
Yes, and tell a little stories and ask me any questions that you have about the natural history, about the experiences I had while being on the field. So it's a real honor to be sharing the story with you.
Super. Should we look at some of the photos?
Sure, yeah. So here we just are looking at the map of the refuge that, as many of you know, it's in the far northeastern corner of Alaska, adjacent to Canada on the east, and the Beaufort Sea of the Arctic Ocean on the north. It's about 19.8 million acres. And the Brooks Mountain Range, which is the northernmost mountain range in the entire circumpolar Arctic, runs through the heart of the refuge. So I did a journey throughout the refuge I'll talk about, where I documented the land, the wildlife, and both indigenous cultures, the Inupiat Eskimos and the Gwich'in Athabaskan Indians, who have lived there for over 10,000 years. So we'll run through some of the images and tell some of the stories that how did this really come together. So here I just talk about a few very special things about the refuge, that this is truly the place where it hosts the largest number of both animal and plant species of any conservation area in this entire circumpolar north. It's the landing habitat for the polar bear. The massive herd of the porcupine caribou migrate throughout the refuge. They come to the coastal plain every spring to calve. The muskox, which was once completely exterminated from Alaska in the late 1800s, when the commercial whalers came in and firearms were introduced, they were reintroduced into the refuge. And they are thriving up there. And then birds, which is amazing that the birds come from 6 continents and all 50 states of our country to go to the refuge to nest and rear their young.
That's wonderful. We don't normally think of the Arctic Refuge as being a great bird.
Yeah, I mean, like David Sibley, he talks about in his essay in the book that through these birds, this place is connected to us all from all over the world, and that's really the truth. What we are going to look at next is where my journey begins. That March 19th, I landed up in Kaktovik, which is the northernmost village, which is on the north side of the refuge, and on my right is Robert Thompson, my friend and guide. He's a Inupiat. He and I traveled about 3,000 miles just during the snow-covered months and another 1,000 miles over the summer months. Here we are on the Hula Hula River Valley. The first day I landed up there, it was really the coldest day of that season, March 19, 2001, 40 below zero. Went for a little walk, and that was fine. And in the evening, Robert said, okay, let's go for a ride to a nearby village. We did that, but the wind picked up at like 30, 40 miles per hour. And I was like, wow, I had never experienced anything like that. So what am I doing here?
Yeah, did you start to reconsider maybe what's...
Tremendously, that I panicked and I wanted to come back, and I was wondering, what am I doing here? Because I've gotten myself over my head. As I mentioned that I'm from Calcutta.
Yeah.
But Robert and his wife reassured me that, well, don't worry about it. Things will get worse, but you will survive. And I took one baby step at a time, like making 1 day trip, 2 day trip, 3 day trip. Then finally I got used to the land and really had a wonderful time.
And ultimately you were out there, what, 14 months?
I was on the field 14 months
Wow.
over a period of 2 years, covering all seasons.
That's wonderful.
And seasons of life and the land.
Well, let's look at some more of your images.
Sure.
Here.
This is the highest peak in the Brooks Range. Now the Brooks Mountain Range is the northernmost mountain range in the entire circumpolar Arctic, and the Arctic Refuge has all of the 4 highest peaks in the Brooks Range. This is Mount Easto, and in the foreground is Erie Glacier. And then the next slide, this is Mount Michelson, which is the most popular peak among climbers who go to the Arctic Refuge for climbing peaks.
Did you climb up there?
I did not. I would hope
that
to
looks
someday.
like quite a challenge, yeah.
And then we can look at some more images of the mountain. This is an unnamed peak in the Brooks Range that there are many peaks, valleys and lakes still do not have names in the Arctic Refuge. So it kind of inspires the sense of the wild.
Even the native
truly.
peoples have not given them names?
That's right. Even the native peoples have not given them names.
Oh, that's
So it's a very fascinating place for that. We can look at some more images. This is an important image. This is Mccall Glacier, which is one of the most extensively studied glaciers in the circumpolar Arctic to see signs of climate change due to global warming. And Mccall has lost about 33 feet in depth over the last 4 decades. And I documented this. This is during the winter months. This is the Hula Hula River Valley, just a little bit north of this image where Robert and I were standing, the first image you saw. So from this perspective, the land looks kind of just covered with snow and ice and doesn't seem like there is any life up there. So what we'll do is on the left hand side of that image there is a tiny creek that comes in called Old Man Creek, and Robert and I camped out on the Old Man Creek, the confluence of Old Man and Hula Hula many times. So let's look at the next slide. This is the greatest surprise I had during my entire stay at the refuge. This is a tiny bird, American dipper, a songbird that lives there all winter long on the north side of the refuge. But the remarkable story of this bird is that it needs open water to feed. It feeds on invertebrates. And there is open water even in 50 below zero. So that really boggled my mind.
In like rivers?
In the rivers. So because of deep underground sources and the warm springs, you have open water that provides feeding opportunities for that tiny bird.
Oh, wonderful.
All through winter months. So that was my greatest surprise during my 14-month journey.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So we can see some more. That's a porcupine, a little bit cut off, but that's a porcupine that lives up there that I didn't really expect to see a porcupine in the northern slope of the Brooks Range.
Yeah.
And then we can run through several slides. This is one of my favorite images. This is the Okpilak River Valley, and there are many rivers that run through the refuge. And the entire valley that you see is filled with ptarmigan tracks, which is a bird that also lives there all winter long. There are 2 species of ptarmigans that live there, the willow ptarmigan and the rock ptarmigan. I didn't see the birds at this particular valley, but local people told me a week later or a few days after I photographed this, in the Hula Hula they saw 6,000 ptarmigans aggregated.
That's
so they
amazing.
In the late winter they aggregate into this like the willow patches before heading out to the coastal plain for nesting. So you see these massive aggregations of these birds that who would think would be living there. There are 7 species of birds that live there all winter long on the north side. We can run through some of the, so this is on the Hula Hula River Valley where I did photograph the ptarmigans flying. and you see that tiny patch of brown through the almost the middle of the image, that is a willow patch that feeds a wide variety of wildlife all through winter months, including the ptarmigan, the muskox, moose, porcupine.
Wow.
And the Brooks Mountain Range is in the background. Another shot of ptarmigan at the Hula Hula River Valley. This is a photograph of wolverine tracks intersecting with ptarmigan tracks. As you know, wolverine is the most elusive animal in the Arctic. I did see wolverine 3 times in the refuge, twice in winter and once in summer, but before I pulled out my camera, they were long gone. So
you mentioned camera. Were there any challenges in using cameras and film in 40-degree below weather?
There was remarkable challenges, because the first day I started using my latest camera bodies, Nikon F5, and it freezes. So any camera body that has LCD display or too much electronics would not work. So I had to go back to my older kind of mechanical camera bodies, and that has very little electronic parts. And those worked actually flawlessly. The only thing I have to worry about is keeping the battery warm, and the film rewind and film advance, because the film gets very brittle when it's 50 below zero.
I bet.
So doing it very slowly. Other than that, all of my gear was out in the open. I mean, of course in boxes, but outside. And all of my exposed and unexposed films were outside, and I never had any problem with that. Just keeping the battery warm was the key.
How did you keep the battery warm?
Hand warm. So the battery, what I did is I use simple battery holders that plugs in and out. So I would keep a couple of battery holders inside and one with the camera. As soon as it dies, I keep recirculating that. And it dies pretty quickly, because in that cold, it's,
Sure.
But of course, in that cold, I'm not shooting too many frames.
Yeah, the photographer gets cold also.
That's right,
probably.
exactly.
Well, let's look at some more of your images.
This next image is really an important image. This is a moose that's on the Okpilak River Valley. Okpilak in the Inupiat language means river with no willows. So the question is, where did the willows come from? Alaska Magazine did an article back in 2001 where they showed that one of the striking signs of climate change is this northward movement of the dwarf birch and willows that's not seen in 8,000 years. Along with the movement of the willows brought the moose to the north slope. The early records show that in early 1900 there was no sign of moose in the north slope. They slowly came in along with the vegetation.
Wow.
So today there is moose on the coastal plain. And that's another shot of Mount Chamberlain, which is the second highest peak in the Brooks Range, with 3 moose in the foreground. This is the Arctic Ocean in the winter, so it looks like really a frozen landscape of ice, but it is the home of the ice bear, the polar bear. So on the next slide, I'll talk about the ecology, that the Arctic Refuge coastal plain is the most consistent landing habitat for polar bear in the entire Beaufort Sea coast that spans Alaska and Canada. And the polar bears, unlike grizzly bears, which needs actually a real hole into the mountain to go den, polar bear doesn't need anything fancy. A simple snow bank is good enough for them to go inside the den. They go in the den in November, they give birth in December, January, and they come out with their cubs in March and April. They nurse until that time and they come out. And the Arctic Refuge coastal plain, because of the rivers that are coming out and the narrow band of the coastal tundra, creates this unique terrain which collects these snow drifts early in fall, and then this creates these snow banks that are very suitable for polar bears to go inside the den.
Did you see any mothers with cubs?
We'll see on the next few slides. So this is another picture of that same den from the other side, where you see the tracks of the mother and the baby. I photographed this den after the bears had left. And then if we keep going, this is a story that I'll tell very quickly, that my guide Robert Thompson and I camped out for 29 days in the Canning River Delta, which is the easternmost river in the, the westernmost river in the refuge. And out here we were 29 days, and wind blew steady for about 25 days. We had 4 calm days in between. We had 1 break to resupply for food and fuel. The picture you are looking at is Robert is fixing the tent. The wind was gusting at 60 miles per hour and the temperature was about 40 below zero. So we are looking at 100 below or colder wind chill. And this particular blizzard lasted about 62 hours. So on the next slide, as we see, after all of that wait, actually this happened towards the beginning,
lovely shot.
is we got fortunate to see the bear with 2 cubs come out and play on that bank for about 20 minutes. They went inside the den, blizzard picked up, and then we never saw the bear again. What we did, we built an ice blind much further away from the den, probably 500 yards away from the den, to not disturb the bear, because this is a very sensitive time for the animal.
Right.
So
What
if
is
we
an
keep
ice
rolling,
den? What does an ice den actually consist of?
what is
An
the
ice
den?
blind, excuse me, an ice
Oh,
blind
so all
consist
we
of-
did is we were sitting on the flat Canning River.
Yeah.
So what we did is we collected big piles of snow, and then we built a kind of a big wall behind which we would stand. So we had a little hole kind of a thing, and there is a picture in the book, and we would keep the camera out there, and also we were careful with the wind so
Right.
that the bear,
Can't smell you.
it doesn't, yeah. So it's just a simple wall with ice and snow that we picked
Great.
up.
If you wouldn't mind taking a break here, I think we actually have a caller who's
Sure, yes.
coming in with a question. We have a question
Indeed.
right here from NCTC.
Okay, great.
And caller, would you like to share your question?
Hi, yes, I have a question about, you said that the polar bears go into their dens in November and they come out in March. But do polar bears hibernate, or do they consistently come out to feed and then go back into their dens with their cubs?
Okay, the polar bears, the pregnant females are the only ones that go inside the den. Otherwise, polar bears do not hibernate. So the pregnant females who go inside the den, they do hibernate. Once they go inside the den, they do not come out until in March or April with their cubs.
Oh, okay, so they live off of their stored fat for that amount of time.
That is precisely true, yes.
Oh,
indeed.
okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question.
That's a good question. It makes them
that's
unique
great.
among the,
Yeah.
the bear species.
That's right.
We have some more polar bear images.
Yeah, so this is a bear off of Bernard Harbor near Kaktovik, and we can, yeah. And on the background, you see an Arctic mirage, the way on the back, which is the Arctic Ocean, looks like elevated. That's a mirage. And the brown patch is a barrier island, which is a very unique ecological habitat. I'll talk about it later on in my presentation.
Okay.
This is a bear off of Kaktovik again, in the Bernard Harbor swimming in early fall. The Inupiat people hunt whale in fall, and the remains of the whale are left on the shore, so that attracts the bear to the village. This is my first sight of muskox after nearly 600 miles of travel through the refuge. This is on the Hula Hula River Valley on the foothills area, and you see those little brown patches, that's what they're feeding on. And I'll tell a little bit of story about this. What's happening with the muskox is that the past several years, that one of the impacts of climate change is large bodies of open water on the Arctic coast, both receding ice pack as well as thinning ice pack. These large bodies of water is creating more of a lot of moisture in early fall. So with that is dropping more snow and also freezing rain that's creating hard crust on the coastal tundra. So the muskox is finding it difficult to forage. So they then move back to the foothills areas where you have exposed vegetation.
Yeah.
They feed on. But this is the only land mammal or any animal that I know that drop their calves 6 weeks before any forage is available, 4 to 6 weeks.
Wow.
It's completely, the tundra is covered with snow. But that's the same time the grizzlies are coming out. And the grizzlies are kind of killing the muskox in fairly large number. They're inside the refuge, they have figured it out. So the muskox population inside the refuge is declining quite rapidly.
Oh, no.
And the biologists think one of the reasons is because of these dynamics that's going on with
That's
the deeper
very
snow.
interesting, but sad also.
Yeah. And this is a muskox herd with the second to the right, you will see a tiny baby, probably a day old, that they're on a northward march from the foothills to the coastal tundra to avoid grizzly predation. And they walked nearly 18 miles non-stop. And these kinds of situation, I have to be very careful to not disturb the herd, because they are moving along their way and we are probably half a mile away from them photographing. Because if we disturb them this time of the year, the animals would run possibly, and then the baby would get picked up by the grizzly, or they would go into a defensive circle. Either way, it's a very sensitive time.
Yeah.
So, and then we can run through the thing. This is, they are at the Canning River Delta, and the ice fog slowly started rolling in, and we are watching them sitting behind a little mound of snow, and they went to sleep. They walked all this time, they went to sleep just in any old way, and the sky just started getting richer and richer color, and the ice fog rolled in. And on the next slide, we see very deep pink in the sky, and the ice fog was very thick, and you can see the muskox herd through the ice fog, and this large yellow ball of the midnight sun looming over the herd. And the feeling I had at that point is what Aldo Leopold described in his book, Sand County Almanac. Leopold did a trip on the Colorado Delta in 1922 with his brother, and he saw this flock of sandhill cranes flying overhead, and he wrote, "We and they had found a common home in the remote vastness of space and time. We were both back in the Pleistocene." Muskox are the only Pleistocene surviving member from the ox family.
Oh, wow.
So
that's a lovely thought.
this is a special image. The next one, the Shinjek River Valley that many of you from the training center have been, because this is the place where Olaus and Marty Murray did the first biological expedition into the refuge, and it is their effort that helped create the refuge in 1960 during President Eisenhower's administration. And also this is the first image that you see signs of trees on the south side of the Brooks Range. On the north side there is no real tree. This is Shinjek with Double Mountain, and that blue ice that you see is a unique geologic thing that happens in Arctic rivers, that the river cracks, water comes out and then freezes, and this cracking, overflow water and freezing continues all through winter until you see these massive fields of ice that, and this is the only ice that you actually see during the summer months that does not melt. So it's called off ice. This is a Colleen River, one river drainage east of Shinjek, and if you look at it, it looks like a frozen landscape without any life. And on the next slide, we see the herd of porcupine caribou moving from their wintering range near Arctic village on their way north to the coastal plain to reach the coastal plain in time for calving. And
How
this
long
is the
a
only
migration
time.
is that?
They start about late April, and they will have to get to the coastal plain by end of May, beginning of June.
Wow.
And they all start calving in June, and the first about 10 days of June the calving will be complete. Then we can run through more slides. This is one of my favorite images. It's very painterly. In fact, that's my style of work, as you see, is very subtle soft colors. Is they are migrating over the Colleen River Valley, and they almost looks like ants. And this is the only time you see the true sense of migration, because they form long lines and they are moving with a sense of purpose and determination to reach the coastal plain.
How did you get that shot?
This is an aerial photograph. And this is another, like they would be, you will see caribou tracks all the way to the top of the mountain peak, and they just keep moving. This map shows the sort of the life cycle of the porcupine caribou herd. On the lower central area that you see, that's the caribou's wintering ground near Arctic village, and also the lower right, those two are their major wintering range in Canada and in Alaska. And then as spring comes, they start moving northeast, northwestwardly and northeast, and kind of go around the mountain and then get to the coastal plain, and they start calving in early June. This image shows that now spring is coming. The book is organized around the seasons. I call it seasons of life and land. Spring is coming, you see things are melting, and this is the Congacut River Valley. Later in the summer, Peter Matheson and I floated the river, and it was a wonderful experience.
Oh, yeah.
And Peter writes about his experience in the book. So caribou, pregnant caribou have made it to the coastal plain. This is the coastal plain of the Jego River, and this is like as pregnant as you can get, and I thought that she would drop her calf right in front of me. She didn't. The way I get this close to the caribou is that this is a very sensitive time for the caribou, that if you are standing on the tundra a mile and a half away, they would run, because they have to protect their calves and themselves from grizzly and wolf predation. So the way I get these pictures is I am sitting inside a tent anywhere between 24 to 36 hours and wait for them to show up. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but you get lucky at times. And then as we see more and more that this is a caribou grazing probably 10 feet in front of my tent door, totally oblivious to my presence. The reason they come to the coastal plain is there is this one species of cotton grass that they feed on, which is very nutrient rich, and they build up the milk and nurse their young and then head south. So, it is because of the vegetation they come there, and also because of the mosquitoes, the bugs that drive them more towards the coastal plain. So, we can keep on the next slide.
What keeps the bugs off of the coastal plain?
The breeze from the Arctic coast, and the cool air and the breeze from the Arctic coast keeps the bugs off. In the mountain, in the summertime, it can be 80 degrees above, so it can be very hot.
Yeah. I got one other question.
Sure.
You were able to get very close to the caribou by staying in your tent.
Yes.
How come the tent didn't spook them? The tent I saw before was kind of a bright orange, and it looked like it might have seemed artificial or odd.
That was a winter tent. So, the
I see.
tent that you saw is a very large, big winter tent. The tent that we use in summertime are much smaller tent.
Okay.
But, and it's not necessarily the ground color, because the tent I had unfortunately was green. But for whatever reason, static structures just didn't bother them. So, they came around and they went their ways.
Oh, that's fascinating. I was just
So
curious
was
about
there.
that.
Yeah. And that's a newborn calf on the coastal tundra. And the next one, you see a calf just kind of playing and getting ready, because caribou is this animal that within few hours they have to get up after getting born. They have to get up on their feet and be able to outrun a wolf essentially. So, they are very agile. This is one of my favorite images. You are looking at a herd of females with 3 calves through a deep fog. This is a summer fog. Early morning, I watched them, and in this day, this was the beginning of calving. I saw 3 or 4 calves, and I left this particular spot on June 9th, and the day I was leaving, I saw almost every cow had a calf, and I was surrounded by about 200 to 300 small band of 200 to 300 caribou, and that was a remarkable sight.
Oh, yeah.
This is on the foothills area where I am trying to photograph doll sheep, and the Arctic Refuge is the northernmost range for doll sheep in North America. But this is a summer, kind of a late spring summer picture, where snow can drop any day all through summer months, and the temperature can go to 20 degrees, and you can have 50 miles per hour wind blowing. So, in this day, we are just looking at lichens and rocks and photographing flowers through the snow. And on the next one, this is a capitate lousewort, one of my favorite pictures. Like I mentioned, my childhood, I was a painter, and these are the kinds of images I really like. So, this is a capitate lousewort kind of pushing through the snow in this, after this snowstorm. That's the doll sheep. The doll sheep, getting close to the doll sheep up there is extremely difficult, because they are hunted both by the local Inupiat people as well as sport hunters. So, they are very skittish. So, I waited 5 days inside my tent trying to use the same caribou technique. It did not work. So, finally I decided, well, what if I just show up right among them, which I did. I climbed all the way to the top of the mountain and showed up right among them. I was very calm and quiet, and somehow just started talking to them, and they felt very comfortable and really showed up. Like the next picture you see, this big ram came within like 10-15 feet and literally was just posing right there. And the coat that you see is that they are shedding.
Yeah.
So, from the winter coat to the summer. June is a remarkable month. That is the month that the caribou are giving birth. That is also the month that the doll sheep are giving birth, in late May, early June. And that lambs that you see are about 3 weeks old, because I took this picture around the June 20th, 22nd, something like that. And I was surrounded by about 38, group of 38 ewes and lambs and rams. That's the coastal, that's the Hula Hula River Valley, with the doll sheep skull on the foreground and flowers on the tundra. That's another picture of flowers on the Hula Hula River Valley. Those are rock lichens. Rock lichens. The close up of a rock lichens. They would eat up those rocks
Yeah, over time.
and turn it into dust. Flowers are amazing up there. The Arctic Refuge, as I mentioned before, has the largest number of plant species of any conservation area in the entire circumpolar Arctic. And the abundance of flowers up there is truly remarkable. The only thing about the flowers is that life is very harsh up there. And even the flowers are no more than 6 inches tall, because they have to survive 50-60 miles per hour wind even during the summer months.
Yeah.
So, it is very short stem, no more than 6 inches tall, and also just small patches. You never see big huge field clustered like we see in the lower 48. Up there everything is very modest, and that is really a remarkable beauty of that land.
How are the small clusters a survival trait? How does that help them?
I do not know, that is the thing, I do not know. Maybe, yeah, that is a good question for a botanist, but I never really saw any big huge patch that like the way we see like lupins or anything down here. There everything was kind of scattered all over. That is a good question, I will have to ask the botanist. So, on the next picture, if you see, that is a typical cluster, as you see.
Yep.
That pink flower that you see is a very rare flower that I did not see in any of the new Alaska wildflower books. I had to go back all the way to a 1971 book to find out what this is. It is called Siberian Phlox. It is a Siberian species, and on the next picture I have a close up of the Siberian Phlox. It is just a remarkably beautiful flower with nice pattern and just lovely, lovely flowers. And when you look at them in this massive landscape, it just looks so wild. This is the Kongakat River Valley that Peter Matheson and I floated among with some of our other friends. Kongakat River Valley. That is a cross fox. And that is a Arctic ground squirrel, and they are ever present. They are always fun to watch them. They are just running, hiding and playing, and it is really fun to watch them. Now what I will do is, the Arctic Refuge is the only conservation area again in the entire circumpolar Arctic that has all the Arctic and subarctic ecoregions. And in this map we will see a 250-mile journey that starts at the Arctic coast on the top, on the north, goes through that green, light green area which is the coastal tundra, then the purple area which is the alpine mountain range, and then kind of a beige color area which is the southern taiga, and then the darker green is the boreal forest. So, you see all of the Arctic and subarctic ecoregion. So, what I will do in the next 6 or 7 slides is visually walk us through that landscape. This is, so we are starting at the Arctic coast on the, this is off of icy reef, and you see these sculpted forms of icebergs floating. This is in the summer months, and then next we are walking south. This is called a barrier island, and this is an extremely important ecological habitat for nesting birds that come from all over the world. And on the right of the barrier island is the Arctic coast, on the left is the coastal lagoon. Those logs that you see come down from the Mackenzie River delta, and they were the lifeblood of the Inupiat people, because they would build house with those logs, that is their firewood and all of that. And you can see a viarga, which is essentially that cloud not touching the ground. Before touching the ground, it just dissipates. So, then we start walking south, and this is the coastal lagoon, and you see the Brooks Range mountain in the backdrop, a very peaceful scene. I photographed this is about 3-4 a.m. in the morning, early morning, and then we start walking south. And this is really important picture. This is the Hula Hula Okpilak River Delta. This is exactly what it looks like when an Arctic river meets the Arctic coast. It braids out like that, but you see many patches of blue. Those are the lakes, which is like paradise for nesting birds that come from all over the world. And David and I were in one of these areas, not on this delta, but other deltas where we were photographing and seeing nesting birds. Then we start walking south through this meandering river through the coastal plain all the way back to the Brooks Range mountain. This is the Okpilak River. The landscape is very simple, and its beauty is in this wild vastness that you see these rivers running through the country, wild country. And then we keep walking, and we get into the inside the beginning of the foothills area. This is the Hula Hula River Valley. And the next picture, this is really my most favorite picture of my entire journey, because this one image brings me back to the Arctic Refuge instantly. This is the headwater of the Jago River. There is no unique or strange features. It is a very simple landscape with a wild running river. It is just magnificent. This is a close-up of one of the mountains in the summertime, and then on the next one, the first sight of the trees again, and this is in fall. So, this is the southern taiga, which is the intersecting zone of the alpine and the boreal forest. You see spruce trees, and it is in autumn. So, you see the dwarf birch, which is catching color, and that is the east fork of the Chandala river valley with Brooks Mountain range in the background. And then I was talking about the birds earlier, that this is a remarkable place, that birds come from 6 continents and all 50 states. In fact, I am originally from India, and I see a bird that comes from India. So, that really was a very, very special thing. So, Mark, do you have any question up to this point?
Well, what were some of the types of birds that you did see up there? We've seen ptarmigans and the American dipper. What else?
Those were the winter months. Now,
Yeah.
we are going to actually walk through a wide variety of species. I probably saw nearly 80 or 90 species, maybe even more, while I was up there. So, we will see a few of those species that I saw on the next few slides. We will quickly run through those.
Was it easier or harder to shoot the birds as opposed to the mammals?
What I did is, actually the birds are, well, it is hard to say which was easier. Both have its challenges, because both you have to be kind of sensitive, because you do not want to disturb a nesting bird, that if she leaves the nest and the fox will pick up the eggs. So, both have its own challenges. And about the birds in the Arctic refuge, that it is remarkable, when you are camping out on the coastal tundra, you cannot sleep first in the summer time, because first of all it is 24-hour daylight. Secondly, these birds are making raucous. The loons and the cranes and the swans are just making noise 24 hours a day. So, let us look at some of the birds that I saw. This map shows that birds come there from all 50 states, including Hawaii, which is not shown in the map. And then in the next slide, we start looking at the bird. This is an Arctic tern that comes from the Antarctic all the way to the Arctic refuge coastal plain to nest, and they make every year 24,000 miles round trip journey. So, it is the longest journey of any animal on our planet. And the next one, this is an extremely important image. This is the buff-breasted sandpiper, which has a tiny world population of less than 15,000 birds, and they come from Argentina to the Arctic refuge coastal plain to nest on more of the drier upland areas, and their habitat is truly threatened because they nest on these drier areas, and this bird is engaged in a mating display, and I just came to know yesterday or day before that there is an effort underway to include this species in the Endangered Species Act. So, it is really a very special species, and I was extremely lucky to see this bird. This is a Baird Sandpiper that also is a South American migrant. One of the things being with David Sibley on the field was that I do not know too much about birding, just a little bit, and I would have been interested in more like the big species like swans and the cranes and the loons. David was least interested in that. He was interested in these tiny birds, and he was crawling on the tundra looking for little species. So, he kind of started teaching me the fine art of birding.
So, why is the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge so appealing to birds in summer? What's up there that draws them every year?
First of all, the main thing is the food source, which is the bugs. The mosquitoes are in trillions, which makes our life miserable, makes the birds make all this hard journey to get there. So, the food source is amazing, and then also the nesting habitat, that you have a remarkable diversity of landscape on which they nest, from the rock outcroppings for the falcons and the other raptors, to the coastal ponds and the tundras, to the barrier islands. So, it is a remarkable diversity of landscapes which provides an ideal habitat for nesting. But food source is the main thing for which reason that they come up there. So, we will see some more birds. This is a Pectoral Sandpiper, and that is what the tundra looks like. And then the next one, we will just kind of quickly run through these. These are Stilt Sandpiper, beautiful, beautiful birds. Their patterns are so gorgeous. This is an American golden plover, another South American migrant. This is a semi-palmated plover. This is a loon that is nesting on a near a coastal pond. Loons nest right next to a pond, and it was remarkable that, like I mentioned, that you cannot sleep. because the birds are making noise. On this day, the whole tundra was quiet. This is the summertime, but the snow dropped all night long. It snowed, and the birds sat there on the nest all night long, would not leave the nest because the eggs would get cold, and I watched them just waiting and watching them, and it's a remarkable experience.
Loons make an extraordinary call.
I
grew up in loon territory.
They do make an extraordinary call. It's the wildest call when you hear, you know it. It's magnificent. It's such a wild call. It almost sounds like it's coming from 20 million years ago.
That raises another question. I mean, you you photographed a large number of birds and animals. Were there any that became your favorite? I mean, did you really feel a special affinity towards a bird or a polar bear shot or anything like that?
I don't know. Buff-breasted sandpiper was probably one of my favorite favorite ones, because this tiny bird coming up from so far away land and making this display of courtship, and they have to engage in courtship and then build the nest. I don't know that one. But I honestly, I mean, every one to me is special. I have no favorites. I mean, from the polar bears to the tiny birds, deeper, it's all very special.
They're all your children.
It's all part of the. It's all part of the ecosystem that we live in.
Great.
So yeah.
Well, let's take a look at some more images.
Sure.
Here.
So here I actually documented a very rare event where the loon, both parents share the nesting duty. While one is attending the nest, the other is feeding, and they swap. And I was extremely fortunate enough to document this swapping on the nest. So here actually one bird is coming out and the other getting on the nest. So we'll see the sequence on the next slide, that you see those two eggs, brown eggs, dark brown eggs on the right. This is a very sensitive time, and I do not know if anyone has ever documented this particular thing. And it was remarkable that they allowed me in their presence. I was so humbled that they didn't feel threatened. But I'm very careful about documenting things like this. So are there questions?
Yeah, we have another question. If
Sure.
we could just take a break.
Yes.
Is there a question?
Good afternoon. I'd like to ask Mr. Banerjee, where and how did he develop his environmental ethic? And also, has he given consideration to devoting his photographic skills to work on the Indian subcontinent?
You asked some of my most favorite questions. Like I mentioned, I came to New Mexico to do my graduate studies. I immediately fell in love with the wide open spaces of the Southwest. I got involved with Sierra Club, and I was doing all kinds of outdoor trips with them. So that's where my first education about enjoying and conserving nature started. Then over the years, like over a decade, I read many books and started learning about it and going out on nature to enjoy, so develop that you call land ethic. And of course, like Leopold and many other authors that I read. And to answer your second question, that yes, indeed, hopefully maybe my next project is in India, because I feel that it is a truly a remarkable place with extremely important biodiversity, but it is a place that we may lose in our lifetime. So yes, indeed, I would hope to work on a project like that someday.
Thanks for your question.
Thank you for your question.
As we look at some more birds.
Sure. So this is a pair of swans on the Aichilek River, and that brown backdrop you see is the coastal plain. This is a common eider sitting on a nest, perfectly camouflaged. You can hardly see her. This is a rock ptarmigan. This is a quick interesting story I'll tell, is that this is a male rock ptarmigan. This is not a female sitting on a nest. And the interesting story is that the males change plumage, which is you are looking at the winter plumage, and to the summer plumage, which is brown, much later than the females. So the females would quickly change plumage and start nesting, while the males maintain this white plumage and start distracting. So predatory birds like golden eagle and others get distracted from the nest, but sometimes the males would get picked up by a golden eagle. But it's an amazing story. So
that is an amazing story. I had no idea.
Yeah, that's what they do, and that was a rock ptarmigan. So we can look at more pictures. This is Lapland longspur, the most beautiful songs of any bird that I have ever heard. And this bird would be like, every morning I would wake up from outside my tent when I was camping at the Turner River, and he would start singing every morning. Beautiful song, probably 15 feet from my tent, but he was not singing to entertain me. He was singing to distract me from the nest that his partner was attending. So then
where did you learn so much about birds? Did David Sibley talk to you about it? Or had you done extensive research before?
To be
you went
very
up there?
honest with you, what I did is before even I started this project, like goes back to your very first question, how did I get involved, is that I started communicating with the biologist of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Fairbanks, and they started sending me the biological reports that were done way back in '88 and before and after, and I was truly blown away by the biodiversity. So I started reading about it and started learning about what this place has to offer. So that's how I slowly picked up. But my knowledge is pretty shallow though. So
it's nice to know somebody's reading our Fish and Wildlife Service reports too.
Oh no, those are
that's
magnificent
gratifying.
reports.
It's,
those are magnificent reports. Oh, I think everybody should read those reports.
Did you get a lot of support from the personnel up there? at Arctic
Tremendous
Refuge?
support, tremendous support. I worked very closely with the staff there to learn about the ecology, their behavior, like I talked about the muskox, that why is it sensitive, that I was very careful, like I asked them before I even go out on a shoot, is that what should and shouldn't I be doing, like this is a very sensitive time. So I had a lot of hours and hours of conversation, not just reading the reports, but hours and hours of consultation with them. And they were extremely gracious to provide me the information.
Oh, super.
So I'm very thankful for that. So we can look at, this is a long-tailed duck, and they come in very large number on the Arctic Refuge, like 2, 3, 400,000, very large number. And we can look at some more pictures. Let's see what we have. This is a surf scoters. Now surf scoters, these are all males. They don't come there to nest. They nest on the southern side on the Yukon Delta, but they come to the Arctic Refuge coast to molt later on, only the males. So they are flying over Beaufort Lagoon, and on the backdrop you see the coastal tundra and the Brooks Mountain Range. These are 3 female king eiders, and that's long-billed dowitcher, and that's what the tundra looks like. And like David taught me that this is the bird that's impossible to find their nest. He thought that this is the smartest bird. He tried it before, and he tried 2 days. He and I were just crawling on the ground looking for its nest. We
Never
just
found it?
never found it. So this is still the most elusive bird.
You'll have to
very
go
smart.
back up there.
That's right. Sandhill cranes, they come up there to nest. And this is the hunter bird, the Pomeranian Jaeger. They come from the South Seas, and they come there also to the Arctic Refuge coastal plain to nest, but they hunt on other tiny birds, their eggs and their chicks and stuff. Well, everybody has to live.
Yeah.
So, and this is the baby Lapland longspur, the bird that I showed before, which is a songbird, and they are being born in late June, early July, and in July the tundra is getting filled with these chicks. This is a gyrfalcon chick. It came out of the nest just this day and is trying to flex its wing and trying to fly. In fact, Peter Matheson and I were together on the field here. The most remarkable thing was that in 3 different rock ledges, about probably 100 to 150 yards apart, there was a gyrfalcon nest, a peregrine falcon nest, and a rough-legged hawk nest. Wow. And Peter wrote that was the most remarkable experience that he ever had, and that was really nice to see that. The same gyrfalcon chick. That's a perfectly camouflaged peregrine falcon. You can see on the lower middle section.
Might be too perfectly camouflaged.
Yeah.
I'm sure I can make it out.
Actually, on the TV screen, it looks a little contrasty, but on the book, you'll see, yeah, it's. Now, the book is organized around the seasons. So this is the autumn, and autumn on the north side is very modest. You have the small patches of the willows, which catches color, and you have some berries that catches color. And this is the Hula Hula River Valley, right in the middle. And then this is the Hula Hula River Valley, and we can quickly run through some of these. But autumn is a magnificent time because up to 300,000 snow geese show up there from their nesting colony in Banks Island and other places in the Canadian Arctic to the Arctic Refuge coastal plain to feed on another species of cotton grass, build up fat reserve before heading south. It was just a remarkable sight. And this, in this image, if you just follow that line through the center of the image, the birds go all the way back to the Arctic coast. So, it is just filled with birds. This is again one of my favorite images that brings me back to the Arctic. This braided river, very simple landscape of the coastal tundra, and these birds are flying. This is on the south side. I am now in this work, I have also documented both cultures, and the Gwich'in Athabascan and the Inupiat people who have lived on this ecosystem for over 10,000 years. We can quickly run through some of these slides, the landscape slides. This is an unnamed lake on the south side. It is a double rainbow on the southern taiga. This is the Junjek river. So, here I am showing sort of the homeland of the Inupiat and the Gwich'in. The brown part is the homeland of the Inupiat people, traditional homeland, and the green part is the traditional homeland of the Gwich'in people. And here I am on a hunting trip with my Gwich'in friends along the east fork of the Chandalar River Valley, Charlie Sweeney, Mike Garnett, and Jimmy John. This is a typical watchtower from which they watch for moose or caribou and other wildlife. So, finally, after 5 weeks of being there, this was a difficult year for them, found a moose, and autumn is in full swing then. Meat is brought back to the village and is shared with the community, friends and the community, and also the meat goes out to other villages who may or may not have gotten any meat for the season. This is Sarah James, my dear friend, and she has been working all her life to protect the Gwich'in way of life. This is a solar panel in Arctic village. And now I am on the north side. The Inupiat people depend on the bowhead whale, like the Gwich'in people depend on the porcupine caribou, the Inupiats depend on the bowhead whale. And we can run through the slides and I can talk. The bowhead whale, after an animal is taken in both cultures, prayer is given to thank not only God, but to the animal for giving itself to the community. So, we can quickly run through these slides.
Yeah. How are the
Next
whales hunted actually?
So, basically they go out on boats and I have not been to the actual hunt, and then they use harpoon and then a bomb goes out inside the whale that blows it, and it is a very quick death. So, they have developed a technique to do it in a quick way.
Okay.
And then the next slides, this is a Inupiat Cemetery with the bowhead whale jawbones.
Wow.
Northern light, green northern light, but in the next 3 or 4 slides quickly I will show you a remarkable northern light sighting. This is November 5th.
Wow.
Amazing thing happened, the sky started like that, and on the next one the color started getting richer and richer. We are on the Hula Hula River Valley, and then it turned into this. It was a magnificent sight that my guide said, Robert, he has never seen in the entire life in the Brooks Range. He saw last time a display like this was in 1958 in interior Alaska. Now, this was a remarkable sight that was on front page news in many newspapers.
Gorgeous photos.
And I was truly, it was a spiritual experience for me, that I was so awed by the display.
That was amazing.
So, with that,
let me ask you a question that came up because we were looking at the Gwich'in, the Inupiat people. You've actually had a unique circumstance in that in your life you lived with 3 different cultures at least, or 4 I guess. Have you noticed a different environmental outlook amongst Indians, Americans, the Gwich'ins and the Inupiat folks?
That's a very interesting point, is that about the Gwich'in and the Inupiat, what I noticed is that they are extremely tied to the land. So, because they depend on it. So, that is why they are very integrated with the land. We have lost a lot of that in our current society, and even in India where I grew up in Calcutta, we have lost that. But when I go to the villages in India, I see they are deeply tied to the land too. So, if you go to the more remoter sections, you see that these people have a very close tie with the land. But somehow in our modern cities and everything, we are losing the connection with the land, and because it is part of the whole ecosystem. Yeah.
Let me ask you another question, because you quoted from Leopold earlier on with the muskox and so on, and you said you did a lot of reading when you were in New
some
Mexico.
reading.
Well, but who were some of the environmental writers that inspired you?
Oh, many. I mean, Leopold and Rachel Carson, Muris, and Peter Matheson, and so many others.
Some of whom
David
you were able to
Flower.
actually collect in your book.
That's right. Schaller,
Yeah.
John Schaller. So I wrote. Now I'm still not, I would like to read a lot more. I mean, this is kind of just an ongoing lifelong journey that I would like to keep reading and learn and use that knowledge on my fieldwork.
Well, speaking of journeys, well, let me go out with one last obvious question, and that's, what's your next project going to be? You've done Arctic. Where will you go from here?
Well, on this project, I'll be on the road at least another year and a half to just give presentations about the Arctic Refuge, like here I gave.
Right.
After that, who knows? I would like to work on a project in India and the Indian subcontinent, because I feel that there is a need.
Yeah.
So maybe, hopefully, it'll work out. Who knows?
That
We
would
don't
be
know.
fascinating. Well, Subhankar, I'd like to thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time and sharing your really beautiful photography work. And I'd like to thank all the audience members who took an hour out of their time to tune in and watch this, and thank the crew out here, Mark and Clayton and Steve, for making this run so smoothly. And hopefully you'll tune in when we have our next speaker out here.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, it's good to have you out
It's
here.
a great honor to be here. And thank you, Steve.